What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the comedy crime drama television series Sneaky Pete, why the ending of the series was bad, and what it should have been instead. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if for some reason you haven't gotten around to watching this series yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. Sneaky Pete is an American comedy crime drama television series created by David Shore and Bryan Cranston. The series follows Marius Josipovic, played by Giovanni Ribisi, a released convict who adopts the identity of his cellmate, Pete Murphy, to avoid his past life. The series also stars Marin Ireland, Shane McRae, Lee Bauer, Michael Dreyer, Peter Garrity, and Margot Martindale. The pilot episode premiered on August 7th, 2015, and was followed by a full series order later that September. Shore left the project in early 2016 and was replaced by Graham Yost, who served as executive producer and showrunner for the remaining 9 episodes. The first season premiered in its entirety on January 13th of 2017, exclusively on Amazon Prime Video. On January 19th of 2017, Amazon announced that Sneaky Pete had been renewed for a second season, which was released on March 9th of 2018. On July 28th of 2018, Amazon announced that the series had been renewed for a third season, which was released on May 10th of 2019. On June 4th of 2019, Amazon canceled the series after 3 seasons. And at the time of the making of this video, the series has a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, with its popcorn meter currently sitting at 91%. The series has a Metascore of 76 on Metacritic based on 27 critic reviews, with a user score of 7.5 based on 191 user ratings. And finally, the series has an 8.0 out of 10 on IMDb, with almost 46,000 ratings. Now, I watched the first season of Sneaky Pete back when the show was first released in its entirety on Amazon Prime. But because season 2 of the show didn't happen until a few years later, the show fell off my radar, if I'm being honest. But the show recently was added to Netflix, which put it back on my radar. And I was in the mood to finish what I had started all those years ago. So I settled in and I watched the show in its entirety over the last few days. And for the most part, the show was a fairly easy watch. But then I got to the end, and I was left deeply disappointed by what I saw. Now, the ending of Sneaky Pete left a lot to be desired, in my opinion, mostly because the show's arc doesn't get back to zero. In fact, nobody's character arc gets back there either. I mean, sure, some of the arcs do get really close, but none of them actually zero out, which isn't an accident or even clever, in my opinion. I believed it to be bad writing, and what's worse is that it had to have been deliberate. Now, this show has always been about a man who shared a cell with another man, learned about his family, and then got released from prison, only to go to that man's family and pretend to be their long-lost family member as a means to con them into keeping him safe from another man who wanted him dead for a past betrayal. Given that, the show was pretty easily recognizable as far as the hook is concerned. That being, what happened when the Bowman family and their extensions figure out that Marius Josipovic isn't their long-lost family member, Pete. It's literally the biggest reason you continue to watch the show. I always tell you guys, the hook is what keeps you coming back week after week after week after week to watch the episodes. But we never get that answer, or at least not fully. I mean, sure, Julia does find out in no uncertain terms that Marius isn't Pete, but she never tells her family. And the reason is because she simply doesn't want to hurt them. a rather ridiculous sentiment in the grand scheme of things, if I'm being completely honest. Now, Audrey seems to at least know that something with Pete is up, to the point that in season 1, she's having him followed by a man who works for a rival bail bond company as a means for him repaying a favor. She seems to know something isn't right with Pete, but she never truly considers that he isn't actually her grandson. Now, as for Carly goes to great lengths in season 1 to prove that Pete isn't exactly who he says he is. She even gathers what should be rather compelling evidence, but she never gets to the point of specifically calling Pete out or telling her family either. Mostly because over time, she and Pete became close. Another terrible reason, all things considered. And finally, at the end of season 3, Pete seems like he's about to tell the family his secret himself. But Otto stops him, explaining that he's family, which was sweet, I'll admit, but this conversation absolutely has to be had given the show's premise. I mean, imagine Deborah never finding out that Dexter's a serial killer in Dexter. Or Brock never finding out that Lucas Hood isn't Lucas Hood at the end of Banshee. That's an unforgivable writing choice, in my opinion. And I say choice because it's clear that it wasn't a narrative oversight. And to make matters worse, that's not the only thing the writers fumbled in the end. The writers had been shipping Julia and Pete, well, Marius, since season 1. There was a particular scene wherein Carly remarks that Marius is cute, and Julia reminds her that Pete is their cousin. That's a pretty loud narrative declaration that the writers want the audience to see romantic potential between those two characters, and that a relationship could happen once it becomes clear that they're not actually related. That's why it's Julia that finds out for certain that Marius isn't Pete at the end of season 2, to ramp up the speculation that Pete might end up with Julia in the end, well, Marius. Even Audrey remarks in the final scene that if it weren't for the fact that the pair are related, that the way they are being with each other would make tongues wag. They're in love. Clearly they're in love. And it was proven over and over again throughout the series. It was proven by Julia when she went to Marius in season 1 about all of her relationship drama with her ex. It was proven again when, after she found out that Pete was really Marius, that she didn't out him to her family. And let's be clear, Marius loves her too. He risked his life and jail time in order to save her. That's real love shit 101 in screenplays, I'm sorry. But the writers throw all of that buildup away in the final scene when Julia asks Marius if he loves Lizzie. And despite everything that we see happen over the course of the final season, and more specifically, the final few episodes of the series, he claims he does. And the proof is in Julia's eyes as she is literally brought to tears by the answer. Now, another thing I thought the writers did that crossed the line, narratively speaking, of course, was the fact that we spent the entirety of season 3 in California as Carly risked her entire family to find her mother, who both she and we were convinced could have faked her death and might still be alive, living La Vida Loca on the West Coast. And almost an entire season goes by with lots of drama to be had, I'll admit, but we and the Bowman, and by extension the rest of the family, finally get to the end of that yellow brick road only to find out that Pete's mom, Maggie, had assumed Lila's identity in an effort to simply stay away from the rest of the family. And don't get me wrong, I can live with a little bait and switch in small doses, right? Hey guys, look over here while we do some diddly-diddly-do over there. But this was a bridge a bit too far for me, again, narratively speaking. It was literally an entire season flushed down the drain, in my opinion. And speaking of Maggie, Pete, her real son Pete, just disappears for the end of the story, never to be seen or heard from again. And that again was simply ridiculous, narratively speaking, especially since he had been such a big part of the story to that point, especially in season 2. And finally, if you really think about it, I'll say again that none of the recurring characters' arcs actually zero out. Let's take a closer look at what I mean by that. Audrey and Otto have been trying to save their business or keep it afloat pretty much the entirety series. And at the end of the show, we never really see if they manage to do it or not. Taylor has been hooking up with Shannon, his high school sweetheart, behind her husband's back, who happens to own the rival bail bonds company, trying to ruin the Bowman's business. And he also crashes out and basically loses his job as a cop. And we think that he will likely end up working at the family's business, which I think is fine. And last but not least, Taylor falls for Amy, who happens to be his grandfather's former mistress. Weird, but okay. We can speculate about what happened there, but we really never get definitive answers about how any of that plays out. Now, Carly says in the final scene that she finally wants to go to college now that she knows the truth about her mother, which is fine, I suppose. But Julia, the person whose life is still the most up in the air, simply gets handed a few loose diamonds to go get a good lawyer, and we're supposed to cross our fingers that everything just simply works out. Before my man Marius turns and simply walks down the beach as the series cuts to black. Now, first things first, I think the real Pete should have spent most of the show in prison, maybe getting out near the end of the series, maybe even the penultimate episode. This would have ratcheted up the tension around Marius and his conning of Pete's family, leading up to the disclosure we had all been watching the series for in the finale. I think Carly could have actually found her mom alive, and the rest of the family, the Bowman family, would have been reunited. I think Lizzie could have been a woman scorned, certainly, forcing Marius to help her or be outed to the family, but him being in love with her simply it complicated an already complicated narrative, right? She should have simply been the foil to Marius over the course of the season, and she could have used Julia as a pawn due to her jealousy. I think that was just a much cleaner way to move forward in that particular endeavor. And speaking of Julia, she should have admitted to being in love with Marius at the end, and Marius should have admitted the same. He gives her the diamonds, and the pair decide to go back to Connecticut together. They all arrive back at the farm to find the real Pete there, and he's surprised to see Marius with the family. He explains who he is, and the family is surprised, but they come to terms with the situation pretty quickly given all that has happened. Marius and Julia declare their love for each other openly, and they kiss. Then we see the family sitting around the dinner table, laughing and talking about past memories, and catching Pete up on everything that he's missed, being locked up, and certainly everything that he's missed since the start of the show. Then we would fast forward a bit, and we would see Julia acquitted for her crimes. We see Carly graduate from high school. We see that the business has been saved and is thriving, and everyone in the family works there, including Marius, except for Carly, who heads off to college, maybe even in California somewhere, in the final scene. Now, overall, I would give this series a 65%, or a 6.5 out of 10 if you're thinking IMDb score. Look, this show certainly had its strengths. Definitely where the acting and the small writing was concerned. In that regard, I was impressed. But I think that all that capital is wasted because the plot points of this story border on overly ridiculous, even for an hour-long dark comedy. And the final season was just too much of a wild goose chase with absolutely no payoff for me to forgive. That said, the show flows fairly smoothly, especially given that there are only 3 seasons with 10 episodes each, making for a fairly painless binge. If you're asking me, I'd recommend this show for someone who hadn't seen it yet and who might be looking for something new that they can watch over the course of a lazy weekend. But as it pertains to how the story resolved itself, I have to say I was a bit disappointed. But what do you guys think? Have you seen Sneaky Pete yet? If you have, what did you think about the search for Lila? What did you think about Pete's disappearance? What did you think about Julia's unrequited love? And what did you think about Marius simply walking away from the family altogether in the end? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also now support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, feel free to subscribe to my new Shorts channel for additional content. The link is in the description. You can also subscribe to my Reaction and Reviews channel. That link will also be in the description. In addition, be sure to go check out themadScreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all on the next video.